Imagine waking up tomorrow to the news that the world's greatest military power has just crossed a border in South America. This isn't a movie script. It's a possibility that would change the world. The United States invades Venezuela. Just saying, it sounds disproportionate. Almost unreal. But for years, this idea has floated around in political speeches, strategic analyses, and alarmist headlines. The question isn't just if it could happen, but what would actually happen if it did. To understand this, we first need to lay out the chessboard. Venezuela isn't just a country in crisis. It's home to one of the largest oil reserves on the planet. It's strategically located in the Caribbean, and it maintains alliances with powers like Russia, China, and Iran. It's not an isolated target. It's a key piece in a global game. A U.S. invasion wouldn't begin with troops landing on beaches. It would start much earlier. Cyber attacks, a total blockade of airspace, maritime control, and the neutralization of radar and communications. In a matter of hours, the Venezuelan state would be left partially blind and deaf. The technological superiority of the United States is overwhelming. Militarily, the initial outcome would be clear. The Venezuelan armed forces couldn't go head-to-head with the most powerful army on the planet. Major bases would be disabled, the Air Force grounded, and command centers compromised. In strictly conventional terms, organized resistance would be short. But this is where the story stops being simple. Because an invasion isn't one just with tanks and drones. It's won or lost in the streets, among the civilian population, and over time. And Venezuela is not an empty country. It's home to over 28 million people, many of them armed, many desperate, and many with reasons to resist, and others with reasons to collaborate. At that point, the conflict would transform. It would shift from a quick military operation to a prolonged occupation. Guerrilla warfare, sabotage, irregular attacks, a scenario very similar to Iraq, but in Latin America, with jungles, dense cities, and porous borders. Meanwhile, the regional impact would be immediate. Colombia, Brazil, and the Caribbean would be dragged into the chaos. Millions of refugees would cross borders within weeks. The health and economic systems of neighboring countries would collapse under the pressure. Latin America, already in a fragile state, would enter its greatest crises in decades. And the world wouldn't just stand by and watch. Russia and China wouldn't send troops directly, but they would respond. They'd supply weapons, intelligence, and apply economic pressure. They'd make strategic moves in other parts of the world. Ukraine, Taiwan, the Middle East. An invasion of Venezuela wouldn't be an isolated event. It would be one domino pushing over all the others. Global markets would react in hours. The price of oil would skyrocket. Global trade would suffer. Inflation would spike in countries that can't even point to Venezuela on a map. A localized military decision would have consequences at the dinner table of any family in the world. And within the United States, support wouldn't be unanimous either. A long, costly war with no clear end in sight would divide society, drain resources, and create enormous political pressure. Because it's one thing to overthrow a government, and a completely different thing to build something stable in its place. And here's the critical point, the uncomfortable truth that almost no one wants to say out loud. Even if the United States won, it would lose. It would lose international legitimacy. It would lose billions of dollars every month. It would lose regional stability. And above all, it would lose control of a narrative that would become a symbol of modern imperialism for an entire generation. Venezuela wouldn't automatically become a prosperous democracy. It would become a constant battleground, where every mistake would fuel more resistance, and every passing day would make it harder to leave. The question would no longer be, why did they invade? But how do they get out? Invasions just don't work like they used to. In the 21st century, military power doesn't guarantee political control, or peace, or stability. Sometimes, it only guarantees an open wound that takes decades to heal. Thinking about a U.S. invasion of Venezuela isn't a fantasy exercise. It's a warning, because when simple solutions are applied to complex problems, the consequences are often irreversible. And now I ask you, do you think a military intervention could actually improve the situation in Venezuela? Or would it only make things worse for everyone? I'll be reading your comments. If this analysis made you think, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.